Hello, my name is Gene Monterastelli, and I am the editor of TappingQA.com. And the video that you are about to watch is an interview that I did as part of the 24 Hours of Tapping. The 24 Hours of Tapping was a free event, which was a fundraiser for the Peaceful Heart Network. The Peaceful Heart Network provides training and trauma relief tools to those in war-torn countries, as well as working with refugees all over the world. They've been able to help out over 200,000 people all over the world. After you watch this video, if you find this video something that was useful, the very easy way that you can say thank you to the guest for giving their time and sharing their expertise is to go to 24hoursoftapping.com/support and make a small contribution to support the Peaceful Heart Network. Again, that is 24hoursoftapping.com/support, and I hope you enjoy this conversation. Is my friend Jen. Jen is a trained naturopath doctor and is obsessed with neuroscience and how to change our physiology, how changing our physiology can create real change in our lives. Using somatic tools like EFT tapping and developmental rhythmic movement, among other things, she helps people mature their nervous systems and untangle old patterns that no longer serve them so they can enjoy a greater sense of freedom and peace. It's always this amazingly exciting opportunity when the dyslexic has to read things into a microphone. I do so much better just speaking off the top of the head. Please welcome to the stream, my friend Jen. Jen, how are you doing today?
I'm very good. I'm sorry, as you were reading physiology, I was thinking, shoot, I'm sorry that I gave you a mouthful there.
You could have given me a 2-syllable word, and I would have struggled with it as well. The length of the word is not the issue. It's my brain, and it's just what we live with, and that's okay. And that's why we have lovely conversations like this. So just to let people know, I'm just giving people a chance to sense of this global opportunity that we're having. Where are you currently located in the world right now?
I am in the very, very bottom of Canada, where it juts out into Michigan, into this top of the U.S. It's in Windsor, Ontario.
Excellent. Well, thanks for spending some time with us today. So one of the questions I've been asking lots of folks as we've been stepping into this conversation is people's origin stories, and not necessarily their tapping origin story, but the origin story about the topic that we're talking about today. So how did you get interested in the nervous system and emotion and how all of those things kind of congeal together as something that we want to approach simultaneously?
Okay. So since I was maybe 12 or something, I really wanted to be a marriage and family therapist, which is kind of weird, but I used to tell people when I grow up, I want to be a marriage counselor. So I knew that I wanted to work in the therapy-ish sort of field. And then when it was time to go to university, I decided in the end to become a music therapist. I thought I was going to get a degree in music therapy, and then I would parlay that into my master's PhD in clinical psychology. So I've always been really interested in it. One semester in music therapy, and I was like, nope, there was not enough neuroscience. And the psychology class I had did a little bit of like the anatomy of the eye and rods and cones and how you see light and color. And I was like, oh, I just miss this so much. So I realized, no, that's not it. And I changed things up and did a pre-med and went to naturopathic medical school. But even as a naturopath with my patients, I'd always be waiting for someone to come in and tell me like, I'm changing my life path. I want to do this new thing. Or it sounds kind of morbid, but like someone came in and they had really unfortunately experienced this unhappy trauma that on the subway. And I was like, oh, thank God, because I loved working with this sort of thing. Like I didn't want them to go through a traumatic experience, but I really enjoyed this so much. So it's been an ongoing journey. How do we understand the physiology of what's happening, but with the way it presents in the way we live our life?
And so now that we've landed in that particular place, like what's the kind of front door that we walk in as we're thinking about understanding the way that our brain and the different parts of our brain and what those parts of the brain are and how they engage with us, just kind of navigating the world as animals that have these emotional responses?
Mm-hmm. Can I get into it?
Please do it.
Okay. So I know that lots of people listening are practitioners and therapists themselves. So this might be I don't know. I love hearing other people who do what I do, because sometimes they'll say it in a slightly different way than I do. And I think,
Yep.
oh, yes, I'm so tired of saying it the way I say it. So hopefully, if you're very experienced, you like this. But I'm not a neuroscientist, but neuroscientists have models that sort of simplify things so that we non-neuroscientists can understand them and apply them. So when I talk about this, I like to talk about the way that our brain works. We have 3 levels. And I'll use my hand as a audio visual. So like the very bottom of our brain here is our brainstem. And this part of our brain covers just like basic survival stuff. Like, I got to breathe. I have to have blood pressure. What's my heart rate like? Am I hungry? Am I thirsty? All the basic stuff that you need to survive. And then the next part that comes along evolutionarily is the limbic system, which is sometimes called the mammalian system, because then as mammals, they were living in groups. It wasn't like I got to have 100 eggs so like 3 of them can survive when they make it to the water and swim away. They lived in groups and communities together. So they only had to have smaller litters, and then everyone would help them, the baby, survive, right? But then when you're living in a group, you have like the dynamics of living in a group. So then this is often called our emotional brain, because this is where we're like jealous and angry and snippy and maternal love and stuff like that. But this part of the brain also houses our memories and our habits and the reward centers, that sort of thing. So it's a very important part of our brain. So it kind of moves up. It's not quite as primitive as this part. But still, you know, when we're in our emotional brains, we're not thinking higher thoughts, let's say.
Right. We're not thinking higher thoughts. That is a fair way to describe me emotionally eating lots of peanut butter cups in the middle of the night. I'm not using my higher brain. Yes.
Yes, exactly. So then this top part, when you fold your fingers over, this is like the squiggly part that you see when people show you a picture of a brain or anyway. So then this part is the more cognitive part. So it's like the planning, logical, reasoning part, but also the front of it here is like the part that connects the dots, and that has aha moments, and that is creative and very future and forward thinking. And it's a really fun place to live. And then depending on how much stress you have going on, or if you're hungry or you're thirsty or you're cold, then you move down those layers of the brain. So maybe you're not be able to use like inspired creative thinking. You just got to reason and logic it. And then if you got a little bit more threat or alarm or something's not right, then you're down into your emotional brain saying things you probably shouldn't have said or might regret later, or snipping. And then if the threat gets worse, then you're into your primitive brain, and it's just action from there on, like reflex taking over. So those are the 3 main levels of the brain that I talk about with people.
Yep.
And what's really interesting is that, so we're more or less born with the brain hardware we have, more or less. And the way that our brain develops, though, is that we make connections between these layers. And humans are really fascinating because we don't come with a ton of pre-programmed stuff. You know, like we're not born and can immediately walk because we are bipedal. We can't have giant babies. We can't gestate for 2 years. But then that allows us to be so amazingly adaptable over time, because we can learn and grow from, you know, whatever situation, whatever part of the world we're born into. So our brains develop from the bottom up and from the back to the front. So that very bottom part there, that's developing in utero. That's developing very, very early on in infancy. And then we move into our emotional brain, and everyone, like, think about a toddler and emotions. We've all seen that, been there. And then this cognitive part comes on when we're a kid, and then it keeps developing into our 20s. I had a therapist tell me once this, and she's like, so basically your kid's front of their brain until they're like 25. And I was like, yeah, no pressure. No pressure there. So that to me is so fascinating. But what's crazy about it is that every day, every little bit of information that comes into our body, like right now, you and I talking, the smart part of my brain and the smart part of your brain are not what's communicating here, in that every time you say something to me or that I say something to you, it goes up through the bottom of our brains, passes through all of this preconceived notions, the way that we see the world, our entire worldview, before it makes it to the smart part of our brain, if we have access to that, because we're fed and we're warm and we're not learning something new. So to me, that's such a huge indicator for the work that we do, because so much of it, people are like, I know, I understand what I'm doing and why it's bad. I just can't stop it. I can't get there.
And when I from time to time I get a chance to do a workshop for parents on the adolescent brain, and the workshop is called "What Were You Thinking?" And the reason why it's called that is when a teenage boy does something dumb, all of the adults around them go, "What were you thinking?" And the teenager boy responds by going, "I don't know." And most adults think the teenage boy is being smart and being sassy with them. And
Mm-hmm.
in reality, what you've just described is the teenage boy is responding honestly what has happened. That as it's going up that path, like you're describing, because of the way their brain is developing, there's so much stuff that's happening in that middle brain right there. They're never getting to the point where they get a chance to think. And so they literally don't know what they're thinking because they're not.
That's it. That's it. They're not thinking. It never made it
Yeah,
up there.
it never got to that point. Yeah.
And
So,
like, just a side comment on that.
yeah.
Another really fascinating part about that teenage brain change is that, like we secrete or we make a lot of this substance that helps neural firing happen really fast when we're young, like toddlerhood, et cetera, right? Myelin. But then we have another burst of myelin to help us make really fast connections in our teenage years. And it's exactly for that reason, because we need to go offline a little bit, because historically, for 100,000 years, that's when we would potentially move out of our tribe and move off with someone else. And we had to completely adapt to a whole new thing. So we needed to make fast connections.
Huh.
And so it was really adaptive. It's just that socially where we are, our biology, as in so many instances, hasn't caught up.
So culture has changed really, really dramatically, very, very quickly, and our brains are catching up, but just generationally catching up, not at the rate in which the way that we communicate. The way that we communicate is radically different than just 20 years ago. The way that who we interact with, how far we go, what parts of the world we're engaging with people is radically different than even when we were children.
That's right.
And yeah, it's interesting how all of that is struggling to catch up and navigate all of that. So then once we have that foundation, so once we can kind of see these are the three parts of the brain and these are how the three parts of the brain work together, then as we're engaging things in the world, how then does our experience impact, cause our nervous system to respond? What does that have to do with the brain? And then with these tools that we have, how can we then respond to do it in a healthier way?
Sure. Okay. So one of the great things about these tools that we have, like tapping, is that they can help us access this lower part here and get the information, like calm it down enough that we can move the information to the next level and move the information to the next level. But not just that, but we expand in therapy. They call it the window of tolerance. All the polyvagal people call it your vagal break, but you're expanding your ability to sit with little bits of stress. And like Bruce Perry, do you know Bruce Perry is a very famous psychiatrist and neuroscientist, and he often talks about like you never grow if you don't have some sort of distress. Ideally, it would be like a controlled amount of distress, like something doesn't work quite out your way, and then you can come back to safety, and then you venture out again, you have a little bit of stress and come back. So then your body is continually growing and learning, and your nervous system can move beyond these things. But you're not being pitched off the deep end necessarily. But then, you're keeping growing. And so you're expanding that ability to sit with more.
And as you say that, the image that immediately comes to mind is a little pile of puppies wrestling with each other, where they're getting a chance through play to learn what combat is going to be like, but it's with folks that I'm in this little bitty pile of herd that we get along together, and it's being done in a safe way, and the stakes aren't really, really high, but they're snipping at each other and they're learning how to engage with something else in a place that might be more treacherous for them at a later time if it's not one that they're related to, or there's a food shortage or something like that. And so it's like it's a controlled place for them to experiment with struggle and failure, but allows them to grow into that.
Exactly. And if we can do that in our own lives, then we're able to keep expanding and growing, even when times are tricky, like say the last 2 years. Then we can stay in our bodies and remain calm. And we can use these tools like tapping to help us stay there and keep that window open for us.
And so at a high level, that makes sense. So then practically, as someone like, I guess the first thing is how do we recognize the fact when our nervous system is triggered and over functioning? And I know that might seem like a simple question, like I know if I'm distressed or I'm not, but I think sometimes it's useful, like you said, to put some vocabulary and describe how we think about it coming from the outside to give us a chance to understand our internal experience a little differently.
So like, how do we know when we're crossing the line and we're moving down further into our
how
brain?
have we gone from a place of, like you're talking about, this safe place where I can be in distress, where I'm able to learn, versus stepping into a place where it's not a learning experience, it's just an overwhelming experience, and my nervous system is doing everything it can to keep me safe, but I'm just flailing around emotionally in that particular state.
Yeah. So like physiologically, what might come up or what?
Absolutely.
Sure.
Yeah.
Okay. So exactly what we were talking about with those areas there, you'll have sensations and feelings like that. So for instance, you might get snippy and say something like, "Oh, I don't normally talk like that," or you might realize like, why do I feel really irritated, or why have I no patience for this, or why am I suddenly like someone just said something to me 3 times and I didn't hear because I was so focused on something else, on whatever the stress was. And then it could be you start feeling like you're sweating a little bit, or you feel like your heart is beating a little bit faster, or you notice your breathing rate is a little bit erratic, or you've been holding your breath. Those are some of the signs that you don't, sometimes it's hard to notice in the moment, but then for instance, earlier today, something came up and I realized that one of my kids had asked me something, like was talking to me, and I was like, whoa, right. Like too many things happening here.
And so one of the things that like I have gotten a chance to notice inside of my own experience is I've trained myself to hear my voice. Like I might not notice when I am frustrated physically, but if like I'm talking to customer support, I was having a struggle with a telecom company, which is a completely human experience at this particular moment in history, where something was not working the way that it was. And as I was talking, even though I was out of my body in this frustration, I started to hear the tone of my voice and I went, ooh, I sound like a grumpopotamus. I know what I sound like when I'm a grumpopotamus. And I caught myself and was able to go, okay, I'm sounding really frustrated right now because I am. I'm sorry. I'm not frustrated with you. I'm frustrated with the circumstance. And you just happen to be the person I'm talking to right now. And I'm sorry for that you're catching the shrapnel from this particular thing. But the thing I was experiencing in my body, I wasn't noticing at all because I was so in the moment there. But the thing that showed up was, there's a tone. That's not a tone that I like living in as I'm engaging with it in that particular way.
Yeah, exactly. So then you were like, you moved into the emotional brain and like the snippiness was coming out.
Yeah, and I could hear that. So then as we start to notice this, like, is there anything specific and practical that is useful when we tap on that particular thing? Or how do you think about, once we recognize the fact that we're triggered in that particular way, that tapping is able to get us a chance to like specifically down regulate our nervous system as we navigate this?
Yeah. So I like to, in these instances, if you want to talk about it, great. But like, if you're in it, you're in it. So you really can just tap. You can just tap. And I know, Jean, you like to do this tap and breathe. Great. So like breathing's part of this bottom part here. It's like the one conscious way that we know that we can access it easily. So just breathe and tap. See how that goes. And then I've been playing around with just recently adding in some more things with my tapping, because this part of the brain here also is born with a handful of reflexes. And they're reflexes that you need as soon as you're born. Like if the side of your cheek is stroked, you turn, because that's where you know you're going to be able to open your mouth and eat from a bottle or from your mom or whatever. So there's a bunch of reflexes like that. And some of them are just like to help you twist and turn your body to be born in the first place as you're going through the birth canal. And then as you're born and these are stimulated, and then they start connecting a little higher up in the brain, a little higher up in the brain, then like a new function will take over. So for instance, if you were to put your finger in a baby's palm, they would just, and it's like the vice grip of death. Like they don't let go. And every parent who's ever worn an earring or had long hair or whatever knows this. But then over time, then that grip changes and it becomes like this, and then it becomes a pincer grasp, and then like this, and it becomes more fine and detailed. But if some of these reflexes, for whatever reason, don't get used enough and don't connect higher up enough, or if you have like an injury or some trauma later on, they get reactivated, then that like base of those networks that get built up, it's not there. And then it sort of alters a little bit how you function down the road. So I've been playing around with how can we give them these movements and tie that into tapping, because it's all very brainstem based. Mm-hmm. And so I've been playing with, can I give even stronger stimulation to this brainstem with tapping and doing this other stuff at the same time? And so it's another way to calm yourself down.
Yeah. So what do some of those things look like if you're willing to share them as you're playing with them?
Yeah, we can do like a little experiment. So,
yes, please.
So again, Bruce Perry, one of my favorite trauma dudes, he talks about, repetitive rhythmic pattern movement, like talks to the brainstem so that you can start accessing the higher up parts. But then there's like a whole area of study of people who just do rhythmic therapeutic movement and or integrate these reflexes. And it's just like doing the same thing over and over again. So for instance, with the hands, you might notice that you have like terrible writing, or you're very sensitive to light touch to the hand, or you always have to like chew on your nails or have your hands in your mouth. And when you're a baby, the reflex of your hands can be tied with reflexes in your feet and your mouth. So like when babies are eating, like little babies are eating, you'll notice their hands pump at the same time. So sometimes if the hand reflex isn't integrated, you might notice that you're a pen cap chewer, or like some kids, like they chew on their clothes all the time or on their sleeve, or like got to make the noise all the time and be really loud, and they need this sort of stimulation. So you can do really simple help for yourself this way, and just practicing the first grasp that you have, and then the second grasp that you have, and then it evolves to this grasp where you're able to do this, and then you practice doing this and practice doing this, and then tapping between each finger, which is funny because tapping on your finger points is kind of like doing this.
Right.
So you're using the reflex and then helping make those connections.
So what it sounds like you're doing is you are intentionally, deliberately going through the type of development that we would normally be doing with our hands, but we're doing it in a super deliberate, conscious way. So we're making sure that we're making all of those connections again, so that like we're either reinforcing or taking care of development that may or may not have happened fully. Is that what I'm hearing when you say that?
Yep, that's exactly it. So then it helps the parts of the brain, lower parts of the brain, some people say mature, and so that it can make those networks and contact higher up. So some people who do this work say, for instance, like kids who have been given a diagnosis of ADHD, they're like, I've never had a kid who came in with ADHD who then left with that diagnosis, because it just happened to be that they needed this sort of stimulus. I'm not going to say anything is a cure-all, because I think that sometimes when you get really excited about something, it's your hammer and everything looks like a nail.
Of course.
But certainly it's super duper helpful for things like various childhood diagnoses and learning processing differences, but also for trauma. It works really, really beautifully well. So if you want to, we'll try one of the actual rhythmic movements and we'll do it with some tapping.
Awesome.
So most of these happen where you're lying on the ground, or like, you throw down a cushy blanket on the ground and do them, but we're not going to do that here. But I think we can adapt this one so we can do it together. And so I'm going to show you the movement. We're going to do it with our feet, but I'm going to show it with my hands so you know what to do with your feet.
Great.
I'm just going to back up a bit. So if these are your feet, my arms are my legs and my hands are my feet. What we're going to do with our feet is, and so you can just do this seated, stretch your legs out in front of you, and maybe rest your feet on your heels, but you want to bring your toes off the floor. And I should say this with the caveat that if you have a hip problem, a knee problem, an ankle problem, and this hurt, like, you are number one, put your own safety and comfort first. We're giving you, we trust you. So your feet are like this, your heels resting on the ground. And what you want to do, put them a few inches apart, and you're just going to go back and forth, so you're touching your big toes, back and forth. So you're touching your big toes. And the movement isn't just coming from your ankle, it's coming from your whole, from your hips. So like your whole leg is kind of rotating. Yeah. So we're just going to do that just for like 10, 20 seconds, back and forth with your legs straight, tapping your toes together, opening up, tapping your. So this is one of the basic rhythmic movements, of which there are, let's say, a dozen plus.
Mm-hmm.
And they're just really gentle movements that we would get as newborns and or in utero, because again, for 100,000 years, we were living a little more tribally and we were walking many more steps a day. And so as a baby, you'd be getting movement, 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 and that was helping develop your brain even in utero. And so they're just tiny little movements that are really relaxing. They feel like primitive and relaxing. And then, of course, the more specific ones for the reflexes.
And it's interesting you say, you know, that they're very relaxing and they're very easy. You know, like we naturally are drawn towards the things that are soothing. Like a baby has never been taught to suck its thumb. It just sucks its thumb because it is a self-soothing activity. And it's interesting when you say that, and you know, I just think about the number of times where I have like been sitting on a beach chair somewhere and I look down and my feet are doing exactly what you're talking about right now, where it could look like, oh, he's just got ADHD and he's fidgety. And that is true as well. But like, you know, we reach for the things that are soothing and are useful for us. And if we're creating some sort of integration in our brain, it makes sense that would be a self-soothing activity as we're doing it in that particular way.
Yeah. And what's interesting is where I'm learning this from, they have a process where let's create a goal. And then we do these movements and then we, look at our goal again. And I think about tapping. We do that all the time and so I'm like, ooh, I'm going to play with this. I'm going to do a little tapping while I do my rhythmic movements, or before and after my rhythmic movements, or can I add this in like daily and tie it into my tapping? And instead of it be like, I have this goal I want to reach, I'm going to do these movements or tapping about it, do it more in a tapping sort of way where I'm like, well, I have this thing I want to release and I want to get into this part of my brain where I think it's stored, stimulate that part of my brain, calm it down with tapping and the movements, and then see if I get faster results.
And so as you're playing with this and you're experimenting and you say you're integrating tapping into this, what does it look like? Does it look like I do the movement, then I tap on an issue, then I do the movement? Or am I like you're doing the movement and tapping simultaneously? Like as you're experimenting, what does that look like?
I try a little bit of both, but the movement's kind of full body, so it's hard to tap at the same time. Gotcha. Especially when you're doing them on your own. Yeah. So like, it's nice to just be like one of the movements, for instance, lying on your side. And like, as you're lying on your side, you're just sort of like rocking back and forth like this. It's so small, but it feels amazing. So it's a little bit hard to be like doing that on the ground and, tapping at the same time, but then to tap beforehand, like do whatever tapping you want to do beforehand or right after it. And then, do the movements in between is what I'm trying. Mm-hmm.
And so as you're playing around with this, are you doing it like you said, the same intention? It's like, boy, I'm worried about my frustration. And then you do this thing while tuning into that, or are you just doing the repetitive motions because there's benefit to them and then tuning into what's going on inside of you after the fact? Like, what's the level of intentionality? Like, because sometimes when we're tapping, it's like, I'm specifically saying what is going on with me. Mm-hmm. What does the intentionality look like as you're playing in this particular way?
So I know you haven't interviewed him yet, but he's coming up. I am playing with Steve Wells' intention tapping with this.
Yep.
And so I'm doing a release. So I'm like, well, what's the thing that's bothering me right now? And like, instead of setting the intention where it's like an affirmation intention, my intention is, okay, I want to let this go or let the story of this go or whatever, like integrate that, release my emotional attachments to blah. And so that I've been doing. So then it ties in with the goal, because I just am not one of those people who is like, yes, I can't wait to say the positive affirmation. Because, in tapping, we use the positive affirmations to come up with the tail enders and the, oh God, statements. So that's how I'm doing it. And I'm playing with it. And then also I've just been using with, I feel really horrible and I'm really irritable. And I could tell I'm really low down in my brain. I'm just going to lay down on the floor and do these movements. And what do you know? I feel so much better after 2 minutes of it.
It's, the human person and the way that we navigate the world is pretty breathtaking and amazing as we do that sort of stuff. Mm-hmm. So as you are continuing to think more and more about the nervous system and how we downregulate it and people doing stuff on their own. What are the kind of most common roadblocks and pitfalls folks fall into as they're trying to create transformation in the nervous system and downregulate what is going on?
I think often what comes up is like, I don't know how to do it. I'm not an expert on it. I don't know. And I know you talk about this all the time. Like, I don't know what to say. I don't have the right words of what to say. But it's not necessarily about that. Like, if you can just get the tapping in even, you don't have to have the perfect words to say. If you can just get the movement in, whatever the therapy is. So that's one of them, like thinking I'm not good enough. I don't know what to do. And then also just doing it like regularly. Some years ago, I was at like a business networking event, and this woman who was a health coach, she was so sweet. And like, I had so much more knowledge around obviously health because I was a naturopath by this point. But she said the simplest line. She's like, eating an apple a day doesn't count if you just eat it one day. You have to eat the apple every single day. And for some reason, her saying it that way, that time made me be like, yes. So like, doing the tapping once, yep, you might be one of those lucky people who have like a wonderful 1 minute miracle. But you're nervous, you're people, you've been living on this planet for a while. This part of you, it probably needs a little more tapping than like the one time you tried it for 5 minutes or 10 minutes. So like, just keep calming it down and notice like that window of tolerance opening.
For me, the literally the way I do that, and I can't reach to it right now because it's under all the piles of papers to navigate what's going on, but I literally give myself gold stars every single day when I do my little tapping to downregulate my little emotional system at the beginning of the day. But yeah, I tap for 5-10 minutes, and it's either a little X in the box or a little gem or something like that to just make me stay on topic, because exactly what you're saying, it's this cumulative process, because what we're doing is, and we talked about this a little bit earlier with Ufungunila, is this idea there's something really, really valuable of just down regulating the emotion in the moment. And that is a good and useful thing. When we're stepping into something like this, where we're getting the opportunity to do things that's connecting different parts of the brain that allow us to navigate the world in a different way, what we're doing is we're building capacity and resilience. Yes. And when something goes wrong, it still impacts me. But if I'm in a really good mood and something impacts me, then I'm in a less good mood. But if I'm frustrated and something goes wrong, then I go angry, where no matter where I am on that emotional scale, the thing that goes wrong is going to drop me the same number of rungs. But the higher I can consistently be in that emotional scale. And so it's not just like what you're talking about here in the way that we transform the brain and our neurology is working, is we're creating this resilience so that, in my business, like, talk about my systems all the time, and I'm like, I don't have systems so my business goes perfectly. I have systems so that when things go wrong, my business is resilient to those sorts of things going wrong. And by doing the work that you're talking about to just do this integration in the brain, it's making it so that we are impacted less by the things that are happening in the environment around us.
That's exactly it. We're letting ourselves live closer to the top more and more, so that whenever whatever happens and it drops us down, we're not dropping down into wah.
Yeah. So is there, other than us playing with our toes a little bit, which was very, very comfortable, is there another tapping or another little exercise you could lead us through to help us kind of do a little more integration or just feel better in the moment as we navigate all this?
Yeah, I'm just trying to think what's something I can give you that like we can do right here where I don't have to lie down to show you.
Yes.
But seriously, even if you were going to lie down, and I'm saying this again to all of you who are practitioners, when you're accessing this part of your brain, you have to take responsibility for your well-being and for your mental, emotional well-being. Yep. And again, a lot of you are very experienced and you know this. But so I would say you can curl up on your side and you put a pillow under your head. And then you would rest your hand on the floor in front of you and really gently just push off, so you have just a little bit of movement, just a little bit of back and forth there while you're on your side. That's it. 20 seconds to start with. And then, so this work, a lot of occupational therapists use to help kids get to the lower parts of their brain. And then they'll work up to, say, doing it like 2 or 3 minutes for each move. But yeah, literally just 20 seconds. And I'm telling you, I did like these 4 moves for 20 seconds each. And I was in a state, I was like crazy PMSy hormonal state. And then I really moved way up. I wasn't perfect, but I was so much better. And I obviously already done tapping, and like that wasn't cutting mustard. I needed to do something more. And it was hysterical. And I went for a walk with my neighbor across the street, who's a psychologist. And I had said, I think I need to chat. Like, do you have 2 seconds to step out? And by the time we chatted, I'm like, so I'm doing this new thing with the tapping. She does tapping too, because I have to go on about tapping to everyone. So now she's trained, uses it with all of her patients as well. And she's amazing with it. I'm like, I'm using this new thing in addition to tapping. And I did this. And she started laughing. She's like, you got on the ground and rocked and then you felt better. I'm like, yeah, basically. So give it a whirl, lie on your side, and just like let yourself rock for 20 seconds. I know, like, Jean, the look on your face is like, yeah, I could do that.
Well, the thing that I'm thinking about as you're saying this is it's almost as if there is the tapping that we do is we're doing software updates and doing this sort of stuff at a neurological level. It's more of like a firmware hardware update. And it's really interesting how like what we're talking about in the last conversation that we just had that you just I saw you jump in for the end of, where we're talking about, you know, attachment issues and parts work for the younger versions of ourselves. Like, there is the experiences that we have that impact us from that very early age, and there are the developmental stages that we go through. And if we can do these things that are helping those developmental stages, that, you know, like when I'm doing parts work, almost always the parts work I am doing is I'm going to this younger version of me and I'm going, hey, guess what? The adult version's now in charge. You get to go play. Stop taking responsibility for what is going on. And I'm liberating it from this thing that is there. I'm equipping it to go be a child. Now we're talking about this in a way where it's not about my experience, like as a human in the stories that I'm learning about the world, but we're talking about what are the developmental stages that we need to go through to learn how to function as these super complicated beings. Because I think you did a really nice thing at the top talking about like how slow our development is compared to other creatures on the planet, where there are creatures that literally pop out of an egg and just walk away because they're in a circumstance they can do that. They're not completely self-sufficient, but they're significant. Looks like they're significantly further along in their development because they're less complicated creatures and they don't have these social networks and all of that stuff that we navigate as humans in the modern world. And so I can see how and why this is something that has created excitement for you in your brain and trying to navigate and figure out, how do I integrate all of this stuff with this transformational work that's going on?
I'm so glad you brought up development, because that's exactly what this is that if we are experiencing stress or alarm the earlier on in our development, then, you know, like it's just deeper and deeper, and it's harder to get to, right? And so how, like, this part of the brain doesn't talk, that's way up here. So what are the ways that it communicates? Well, you know, it has a bunch of networks running up and down where it's sensing, you know, it's got sight, sound, hearing, taste, touch, but it also has movement, and it also has balance, and it also has like neuroception, you know, it's constantly scanning for safety, inside, outside, interrelationally. And so, well, one of the ways we can get through that is through the movement.
Yeah.
And so now we're helping developmentally.
And it's also interesting, like, you know, as I think about that is, you know, the more sedentary of a society that we become, regardless of what's going on in the world recently. I had there's some friends of mine who, when the kids are 12 years old, they all get a trip to New York City to spend a couple of days with Uncle Gene running around the city. And the 12-year-old who was visiting me a couple of weekends ago, every single time we stepped out of the apartment, his first question was, how many blocks is it? Because I don't have a car. I live in a mass transit city. I walk everywhere. And it's not like a value judgment on the way that he's being raised or the world that we're in, but we're in a really different way of navigating the world, and the way the body has evolved to, like you're saying, integrate these parts of educating and functioning the brain as we move up from just natural things that we're doing. When we move less, we don't have the opportunity to experience those exact same things.
Exactly. And one of the things that people talk about for why we might have retained these reflexes longer, and this is not to guilt trip any parent. I had a 3-year-old when my twins were born, and let me tell you, they were locked and loaded because I needed it. But one of the things is that we have our kids in a something, in a carrier, in a high chair, in a bouncy
Right.
chair, in a bumbo chair, like all the different things that we put them in because like how do you have, like in my case, how did I have them all at the same
Right.
time? And it just is what it is. So you can't feel guilty about that. But, kids just need to like back and like rock a little bit and grab their toes and all the little things that just happen over and over and over again. And so now we're just doing that a little bit later.
Yeah. So one of the questions that came into the chat box is like, where can folks find a more comprehensive list of some of these exercises that you're talking about?
So there are lots of different places. A lot of occupational therapists use these. There's rhythmic movement therapy. That's separate. Those are small movements. And then there is integrating primitive reflexes. Lots of really great information on that. And if you want to stay tuned, I'm toying around with like just playing with experienced tappers who like can regulate their nervous system and like, can I do a little bit of that with some experienced tappers too and see how they like it as well? But yeah, those are the two places that I would look for.
Excellent. So once you get to a circumstance where you have gone past the I'm just playing around experimental stage and you have some more stuff for this, let me know. We'll get you back on the podcast so we can have a much more comprehensive conversation about all of this. One of the things that I love so much about you, Jen, is your natural sense of curiosity and willing to go, I wonder what can be learned from this particular thing. And because of your experience and expertise coming from a different direction than a lot of people are coming from the transformational space, like you ask really fascinating questions that give us landing in a spot that I never would have imagined. I never would have imagined 20 years ago I'd be tapping on my face and creating transformation. But even beyond that, like all of the places that you continue to go with all of this stuff is super, super awesome. I really appreciate it.
Thank you. I need to keep growing. I can't idle intellectually. Yeah. I need to keep going. So
the world is way more fun when we do exactly that. Awesomeness. Well, thank you very, very much for your time today, Jen. I really, really appreciate it.
Thank you. And thank you so much for the work that you're doing with this. I'm all about a summit, raising money for a great charity.
Absolutely. Good stuff. I will talk to you very soon, my friend. Thanks a lot.
Bye, everyone.